Caspar David Friedrich is particularly known for his landscape paintings. We can see everything you can think of regarding nature, including oak trees, forests, and even seas. In his works, he focuses on the relationship between humans and nature. He recognizes human helplessness in the face of nature's magnificence, but he also can't help but be fascinated by nature and marvel at its sublimity. His favorite paintings are the unique landscapes that demonstrate nature's power. One of his most famous works that fits this style is Journey Above the Clouds. We see someone looking at the landscape from a hilltop. The view he encounters is impressive, and from a certain perspective, it's blurred, spreading like a blanket without us, and only a portion of the mountain and trees are visible. The focal point of the painting is not humans, but we can't quite say that the mountain is nature. Perhaps the best expression of the painting's focus is the human experience with nature. Two interpretations can be made about the person watching. On the one hand, he seems to be dominating, looking at nature with an air of triumph. Reaching the summit of a mountain has already earned him a reputation of pride for mountain climbers throughout history. But this person is more fascinated by this view than a gesture of pride. Even though this view is a reflection of the view, it is also enchanted by it. He might be lost in thoughts about how insignificant and small he is. We don't know exactly. The fact that he is depicted with his back turned is an important point for our artist, because in many of Friedrich's works, the characters are looking back at the natural landscape. In the Romantic movement, emotions and feelings are at the forefront. He is trying to convey the aesthetic experience that people feel in the presence of nature. And this aesthetic experience can inspire people, can be joyful, and even creepy at times. Against humanity and artificiality, the natural is at the forefront. In this respect, it can also be considered a reaction to industrialization, and if he wants to further elaborate on the aesthetic experience of nature, we encounter the concept of sublimity. Sublimity punishes, cheers, inspires, but on the other hand, it can also be creepy. One of the ways the artist expresses sublimity in his works is to show how small people are compared to nature, using the human body as a measure to express how little space it takes up in the magnificent landscape. Here, the concept of immensity comes into play. We often see the sea in the paintings of Friedrich, more like a forest or sky. These are as vast as they can get. The sky is endless, once the sea is the human eye. He can see up to a certain horizon. Even a relatively smaller mountain has an obstacle. Especially the fact that the mountain is surrounded by fog causes the human eye to not be able to fully assess the size of the mountain. Although sublime is related to beauty, there are some basic differences. We like beautiful things. It draws us in and is positive. Generally, there is a bit of a chill in sublime. Sublime also has a dark side. The fact that Friedrich uses a dose of chill in his works shows that he understands the dark side of sublime very well, not the bright side. In fact, the concept of sublime is very similar to religion. A religious person can also experience awe in the face of a much higher and more powerful power than themselves while worshipping. Sublime can come into play here again. Friedrich was a Christian and depicted the crucifixion of Jesus in many of his works. But these paintings were very different from other paintings depicting the crucifixion, because when the crucifixion of Jesus was to be depicted in art, it was usually depicted in a way that serious pain was at the center and there was little concern for the landscape. However, Friedrich looked back. He exhibited a rather different approach by placing a magnificent landscape in his cross on the mountain. Not only the landscape, but also the light from behind draws our attention. In his cross in the forest, a similarly unnatural light appears. This is one of the reasons why the painter, who avoids using unnatural places in his other works, attaches such importance to nature when it comes to religion. Perhaps the spread of the Romantic movement, regarding nature as a reflection of God, affected not only nature, but also a person's connection to their homeland, country, and religion. It mobilized the enthusiasm for traditional values against innovative movements. He tried to remind people, who began to become deified with industrialization, that they were not at the center of the world, but also existed within a much larger and more sublime system. Realizing that they were only a small part of a huge wheel, the person shivered at their own smallness and experienced a fascination with the sublime. In one of Monk Fetish's most minimalist and somber works, there is an almost black sea, as if a stormy weather prevails. Although we see a lightening of the colors as we move towards the sky, this lightening of the color tone is so subtle that it still reflects the work's beauty. The somber atmosphere is not lost. The fact that the figure looking at the sea is a monk also adds a religious weight to the work. This monk contemplates the divine power of nature while looking at the sea. Perhaps another somber work by Friedrich is the monastery in the oak forest. The monastery is in ruins. In the lower sections, we see people carrying a coffin to the monastery. The interesting part is this religious ritual continues, despite the structure being in ruins. There is an action that transcends space, and this work can also be interpreted in terms of time. On the one hand, there is the human lifespan. The ruin of the monastery has stood for much longer than this person. Humans can build things that transcend their own lifespan and continue after them, like this monastery. But even places have a lifespan. Even places can never compete with nature, yet they cannot be as enduring as oak trees, which live for hundreds of years. Trees have always held an important place in religions, cultures, and mythologies. Oak trees in particular can survive for many years and have a durable and powerful appearance. They can also be used as allegory. When the oak tree is knotted, it takes on a chilling appearance. Another work of Phil Tracy is The Lonely Oak Tree, which is very common in Phil Tracy's works. We can also interpret the tree in terms of time. A sheep can survive for an average of 10 years, while a human can survive for an average of 70 years. This tree has survived for hundreds of years. Gothic architecture also has a special aspect for the Romantic painter. Gothic architecture has a longitudinal structure. Rich ornamentation is preferred over simplicity. Large windows aim to allow light to enter the space and revitalize the spiritual atmosphere. In essence, a space where Gothic architecture is applied attempts to reflect sublimity and power. Therefore, we can consider religious places such as churches and cathedrals as examples of Gothic architecture. Gothic structures are mostly depicted in ruins in the artist's works. In comparing humans and nature, he also addresses the theme of discovery. The 19th century was also an important century in terms of discovery. With the discoveries made, humans pursued the unknowns of nature. But these discoveries also brought danger. During these voyages by ship, people inevitably wondered whether harm would come to the ship and its occupants, whether natural events, such as storms, would sink the ship. His style of reflecting ship voyages in his works is pessimistic. Rather than a successful voyage, we encounter ships sinking. Just as some landscape paintings are dominated by the enchanting aspect of sublimity, these works also feature the chilling aspect of sublimity. Nature's icy indifference to human desires draws our attention. It's also necessary to focus on his painting style. I mentioned Bone in the previous art history video. He was an artist who painted outdoors while looking at the landscape. Considering that Friedrich also painted landscapes, we might assume he painted outdoors, but that's not the case. Friedrich's drawings, which he usually made outdoors, weren't paintings, but rather pencil sketches, rough sketches. He would do his actual work in his studio, first drawing inspiration from nature, making sketches, then returning to his studio, turning to his inner world, and completing his works accordingly. This quote explains himself. In fact, an artist should paint not only what they see in front of them, but also what they see within themselves. He influenced other artists as well. For example, Ivan Shishkin, a painter like him, or in the films of director Tarkovsky. We can also see romantic scenes similar to Friedrich's. William interprets Friedrich's unique aesthetic, spiritual and melancholic style as follows: a believer struggling with doubt in the darkness. There is a somber feeling in Friedrich's works, a celebration of beauty that he is haunted by. But it is not completely somber, but it also has a positive and inspiring side. But it is not completely cheerful either. It leaves us somewhere in between, in the wheel of emotions. John Levant commented on his most famous painting as follows: "We do not see a face. Therefore, it is impossible to know whether the possibility that the young man is facing is exciting, frightening, or both." Most of Friedrich's works are the same. Like the last part of this quote, is it exciting or frightening? Probably both. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.